it is it's a witch hunt.
I don't think that positions the Republicans well if he is the inevitable nominee.
Our overall approach is to build lawful pathways for people to come to the United States and to impose tougher consequences on those who choose not to use those pathways.
They have a deadline now of May 11th. If they do not comply by that time, we will move into contempt proceedings.
Hi, I'm Scott McFarland in New York, and welcome to America Decides. This has been a day and a week of dueling gavels in politics. The gavels in the Capitol signaling a busy week of votes and hearings in Congress, and the gavels in court, where this week has been defined by high-profile legal cases, a jury verdict against Donald Trump, and the new federal prosecution of George Santos. As Washington faces a debt ceiling crisis, the early months of a new presidential campaign, and big changes at the border, two of the biggest names in the Republican Party are wrapped up in legal battles. It has been dominating a lot of the conversation. For more on this, Caitlin Huey-Burns, Nicole Killian, and Robert Costa join us now. Caitlin, CBS News political correspondent, Nicole, CBS News congressional correspondent, and Bob is CBS News' chief election and campaign correspondent. Let's begin there in New Hampshire with you, Bob. Just 24 hours after the former president, has a verdict against him in court, he has a town hall tonight on television. You spoke with voters about this. Let's listen first to what they had to say.
He's a very honorable man. He always said what was on his mind. He was always honest and forthright, and I don't believe lies.
But the Democratic Party does this to every single Republican that is getting close. They always come up with these sexual harassment charges. I'm getting sick and tired of hearing about it.
I've seen a lot of presidents in my time, and from day one, when he became president, they were after him.
Bob, this isn't just unprecedented. This is almost surreal. Paint a picture of what you've seen through this day and this evening in New Hampshire.
Scott, it's great to be with you from here in Manchester, New Hampshire. We did sit down with some Trump supporters at the Red Arrow Diner, a regular stop for many presidential contenders here in the first in the nation primary state. But we also spoke to some New Hampshire Republican women who said that these allegations, now part of a civil lawsuit where Trump has been found liable of sexual abuse and defamation, are very serious. That was at a breakfast conversation earlier today with Asa Hutchinson, the former Arkansas governor. And some of those attendees told CBS News that they believe that her story, E. Jean Carroll's story, is credible, and they are factoring this into their decision ahead of the 2024 primary. So a bit of a mixed response on the ground here in New Hampshire, a real test for former President Trump tonight at that CNN town hall.
At the Capitol, Nicole, if Donald Trump is going to be the nominee for the White House, he's seemingly going to need some surrogates in Congress and his party. So what's the reaction today from Republicans after yesterday's news and ahead of that town hall tonight?
Well, keep in mind, he has been able to garner a number of endorsements, certainly far more than his competitors in the Republican primary here in Congress. So he does still have a base of support here. But, you know, it really isn't moving the needle much with Republicans in terms of this verdict that we saw earlier this week in terms of E. Jean Carroll. You know, most Republicans, especially in the Senate, trying to keep their distance, most notably Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who said he has no observations about this, that this is really about presidential politics, and it will really be up to the American voters to decide. But you have others who have backed the president, like Senator J.D. Vance, who says, you know, it's not going to change his endorsement of the former president at all, and that he continues to support him, even as this town hall goes forward tonight.
And the former president continues to invoke that term witch hunt to describe all these investigations and cases. And Caitlin, on Long Island, George Santos used the term witch hunt earlier today after stepping out of a federal court. You were inside. Set the scene of what happened during his initial court appearance on this new set of federal charges and what he said after.
Yeah, Scott, well, cameras were not allowed in the courtroom, but we were, and we watched Santos as he pleaded not guilty to 13 counts, including fraud, money laundering, making false statements on his 2022 congressional campaign forms. He was pretty solemn. He responded, yes, ma'am, to most of the questions from the judge, asking if he understood his rights. And he also waived his right to a speedy trial. His team arguing that they believe that they want to have the time to gather all the evidence that they believe is contrary to the evidence that the prosecution is facing or is presenting. I asked Santos in a scrum later, what evidence do you have that they don't? And he maintained that he would be able to prove his innocence here. He's been defiant, Scott, as you know, from covering him on Capitol Hill ever since these first allegations broke back in December about him lying about his resume, fabricating parts of his background. But as we saw today with this indictment, these allegations are far more serious than just making things up about your background. A couple things stood out to me, Scott, from that indictment. One was that he allegedly solicited funds from donors and then who thought that they were giving to his campaign and then spent that money on so-called luxury items. He also falsely, allegedly, claimed unemployment benefit insurance, money. Which, as you know, is something that Republicans on Capitol Hill have really wanted to tamp down on. So these are serious allegations. He says that he is going to fight them, and he came out and spoke to the press pretty defiantly afterwards as well. He is heading back to Washington, where he says he wants to continue his work. And, Scott, he's planning on running for re-election. He said he wasn't deterred in doing that.
Let's take a listen for a moment of some of what George Santos said outside the courthouse just after his initial appearance.
Complying throughout this entire process. I have no desire not to comply at this point. They've been gracious in there. Now I'm going to have to go and fight to defend myself. The reality is it's a witch hunt, because it makes no sense that in 4 months, 5 months, I'm indicted.
And Caitlin, I understand he was thanking Republican leaders for their patience at some point during that news conference.
Well, it's really interesting because you've had a lot of Republicans on Capitol Hill, including Republicans from New York, calling on him to resign, and he's defied all of those calls, but he still has maintained support from House Republican leadership. Kevin McCarthy said today that, you're innocent until proven guilty. He deserves his day in court. He's also said that, if he's found guilty, then that's another matter. Then he would likely ask him to resign, as he has done for other members who were found guilty of crimes. But that's been the key here. As you know, Santos has been a key reliable vote for House Republicans with their very narrow majority. And he's pledging to stick around as long as he can. His next court appearance, I should add, is June 30th. And because he waived that right to a speedy trial, this could very well go into next year and into that re-election campaign time.
Even well past it. Bob, back to you in New Hampshire, talking about reaction from fellow Republicans. You got some reaction from fellow Republicans about Donald Trump. Let's take a listen to some of what Asa Hutchinson, who would be one of his competitors, had to say.
If Trump becomes the nominee, do you believe Republicans would face political peril in a general election, especially with women voters?
Well, I don't believe Trump can be elected. First of all, no one wants a repeat of 2020 where you have Trump and Biden running against each other. It's a movie we've seen, we don't need to see again. And Trump is the candidate that the Democrats would prefer. And that is enhanced by the fact that you've got this jury verdict now that made this finding. And so I don't think that positions the Republicans well if he is the inevitable nominee.
We heard John Cornyn use the same phrase, the senator from Texas. I don't think he can be elected. Bob, have you noticed any shift in the reaction ever since this civil trial verdict?
Scott, when you think back to political history, just about 10 years ago, in 2011, a little bit more than a decade, Rick Santorum was going nowhere then in the Republican presidential race, visiting states like Iowa and New Hampshire, trying to get some traction. Nobody really paid him much attention because Mitt Romney was, at that time, the front-runner. Of course, Santorum ended up winning the Iowa caucuses, gaining momentum late. Whether it's former Governor Hutchinson or former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie or a whole series of Republican contenders. They are all looking at this race, and they acknowledge privately and sometimes publicly that Trump is the front runner. But they see what happened yesterday with this verdict, and they do wonder if they just keep trudging ahead in places like New Hampshire, having these town halls, shaking the hands, maybe come summer at a debate, come fall, come winter, they can get a look from these voters who are seasoned in presidential politics. So Asa Hutchinson, he's in the single digits right now, struggling to get any attention, but he's out there because they know that in politics, anything is really possible, especially in a digital age where people are scrolling through constantly and news is always breaking.
Nicole, I want to go back to you because it wasn't so much what happened at the Capitol, but who returned to the Capitol today. Dianne Feinstein came back, her eagerly awaited return. You were there. Set the scene, paint a picture of what that was like and what expectations are for Feinstein moving forward.
Well, keep in mind that Senator Feinstein hasn't been here at the Capitol since late February when she was diagnosed with shingles. And so she returned, unlike the way she left, this time arriving in a wheelchair where she was greeted by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. Now, she said that she is feeling much better, but her office did put out a statement saying that she will have a lighter schedule at the advice of her doctor. Her office said that she continues to suffer from a vision and balance impairments, and so that in part is why she also has this wheelchair. So that is something to keep in mind. You know, how engaged she will be still remains to be seen. She did say, though, that she is committed to her work on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Of course, she took a lot of flack for her absence, even though it was for medical reasons, but certainly it was a concern, particularly among progressive Democrats who were getting concerned about the pace with which the committee was able, or in some cases not able, to move forward on some judicial nominees. She also stressed the importance of the debt limit, saying that that is really very important and something that needs to be tackled right away. So those were some of the reasons behind her return, but certainly many of her colleagues, including Leader Schumer, welcoming her with open arms here today.
Nicole Killian at the Capitol. Caitlin Huey-Burns on Long Island. Robert Costa in Manchester, New Hampshire. We have covered many zip codes today with a lot of new reporting. We thank you all. With the pandemic era Title 42 set to expire tomorrow, what's the Biden administration planning to enact to deal with the increasing immigration at the U.S.-Mexico border? We'll take you there next. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Border Patrol agents apprehended more than 10,000 migrants along the U.S.-Mexico border yesterday. That is a record for a 24-hour period, according to a senior U.S. official speaking with CBS News. And it comes as Title 42 is set to expire tomorrow. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas spoke about it earlier today.
I cannot overemphasize that our current situation is the outcome of Congress leaving a broken, outdated immigration system in place for over 2 decades, despite unanimous agreement that we desperately need legislative reform.
We have this well covered. Nicole Skanga and Camilo Montoya Galvez join us now. Nicole is CBS News' Homeland Security and Justice reporter. She's in Brownsville, Texas. And Camilo is a CBS News immigration reporter. He's in El Paso. I ask if you're watching to indulge us for a moment. The cell signals aren't great there. We may have a little bit of a quirk or a delay as we speak with both Nicole and Camilo. Nicole, as you're in Brownsville, as this deadline nears, what are you hearing? What are the concerns of folks who are there?
Yeah, well, that depends which folks you're talking about, Scott. And actually, as we're talking, you can see one of the buses which is being used to transport migrants. I'm here at Fort Monument, and this was a makeshift border processing center that has been stood up in 72 hours here in Brownsville, Texas, in order to try to, keep up with the demand. It's a contingency measure. The mayor was talking to me the other day, the mayor of Brownsville here, concerned because his city has about the ability to process 1,000 a day. But here in Brownsville, we're seeing closer to 2,000 a day. The Texas National Guard was here earlier, the tactical border force sort of showing off, some of their equipment and what they're equipped to do. And we asked the Brigadier General exactly that. He said he's most concerned with the safety and the well-being of his officers. I spoke with an NGO volunteer earlier today who's stationed at the bus station downtown Brownsville, welcoming migrants. They're concerned about food. They're concerned about safety. They're concerned that migrants here in the Rio Grande Valley have begun to sleep on the street surrounding that area. You know, talking to Border Patrol agents here, concern about capacity. That is part of the reason why we've seen the Biden administration begin to release migrants who are deemed not a national security or public safety threat into the United States without that notice to appear before an immigration judge, instead just with instructions to appear before an ICE office. Last thing, Scott, some late breaking news today that U.S. Secret Service officials will in fact be here on the border. Now, I do want to temper that. I'm told it is a very small number, somewhere around a dozen. But keep in mind, U.S. Secret Service, part of the Department of Homeland Security, and Secretary Mayorkas at his press conference today making it very clear this is a whole of government and a whole of department response.
And we've been told the U.S. is implementing this sweeping new asylum restriction for after Title 42 expires. What does that mean and what does that entail?
Hi, Scott. This regulation represents a seismic shift to U.S. asylum policy, as well as a major pivot in policy shift by President Biden, who campaigned on restoring access to the U.S. asylum system just 2 years ago during the 2020 campaign against former President Donald Trump. Under this regulation, migrants who cross into the U.S. illegally will be disqualified from U.S. asylum if they fail to request protection in a third country like Mexico or Guatemala before coming here to the U.S.-Mexico border. Migrants who are not able to prove that they qualify for an exemption to these rules, Scott, will face deportation to their home country or Mexico and will be banished from the U.S. for 5 years. And if they try to re-enter the U.S., they could face jail time as well as criminal prosecution. So in many ways, Scott, this is a tougher, more hardline measure than the Title 42 pandemic restrictions that it will replace on Friday in just a few hours and days. And the Biden administration is hoping that this policy will deter migration to the U.S.-Mexico border, where officials have been recording record levels of crossings in recent days. But the ACLU has already said that it will challenge this rule in federal court.
Simply a pivotal week for border policy and the reality at the border. Camilo, Nicole, we thank you both. The U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee is continuing its investigation into the Afghanistan withdrawal. Next, we'll hear from the committee's chairman, Congressman Michael McCaul of Texas. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. House Foreign Affairs Chairman Michael McCaul, who's leading the investigation into the Biden administration's Afghanistan withdrawal, is threatening to hold Secretary of State Antony Blinken in contempt of Congress. McCaul is demanding Blinken turn over internal sensitive cables from State Department officials related to the U.S. 2021 exit from Afghanistan. And as of now, the State Department has not complied with McCaul's requests. CBS News senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge joins us now. Earlier today, she spoke with Chairman McCaul. Catherine, first of all, break down what he told us and what he makes of what the Secretary of State has or has not done.
Well, Scott, good to be with you. Congressman McCaul is seeking something called a dissent cable. This is an internal State Department document that allows senior State Department officials to criticize government policy without fear of retaliation. In this case, the policy on Afghanistan. The congressman told us that he is prepared to take very aggressive action if the documents aren't provided by the deadline this week. Here's that part of the conversation. If the May 11th deadline passes, are you prepared to hold the Secretary of State in contempt of Congress?
We are. I mean, it's a path I'd rather not take, but it's necessary because we need to see that dissenting cable. After that period of time, we will have to mark it up out of committee and then go to the floor. I think significantly, Catherine, this will be the first time a Secretary of State has ever been held in contempt by Congress.
And how quickly could all of that happen? What timeline are you looking at?
So May the 11th is the deadline, markup on May 24th, and probably get to the floor first week of June.
So we could be looking at holding the Secretary of State in contempt of Congress by early June, just a few weeks away.
Correct. Again, we're giving them ample time to respond. It's important to note this is a criminal contempt as well. It would be referred, I think it would be voted out of the House, and then we go into judicial proceedings after that.
A similar scenario, Scott, played out with the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo under the Trump administration. House Democrats threatened to hold him in contempt of Congress for failing to provide records that the State Department had provided to the Senate as part of a Hunter Biden investigation. But that fell short and was withdrawn once the State Department did provide those records in the end.
With Title 42 expiring tomorrow, what does the House Foreign Affairs chairman think about the Biden administration's attempt to ramp up these deportations after the expiration?
Well, Scott, as you know, Congressman McCall, his home district is in Texas, so this is an issue that hits very close to home with the congressman. And he made very clear that there are already indicators they're picking up. Of course, he gets classified briefings that there could be a surge in migrants with the collapse or the end of Title 42. Here's that part of the conversation. On Title 42, the Biden administration has brought in new restrictions. Do they go far enough?
You know, I don't think so. I mean, with the lifting of Title 42, it's important to note that, I mean, the situation's already so bad. And lifting Title 42, the cartels know this. We're already seeing indications of massive caravans moving up towards the border. That's why we have this border security bill that my committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, had the piece dealing with reinstituting and codifying the migrant protection protocols to make that part of the law.
And the congressman told CBS News that his bill really is twofold, that it would provide additional technology and funding for the Border Patrol, the physical patrol of the border, and then also create these deterrents and codify these deterrents that he said worked under the last administration, Scott.
Let me shift gears, Catherine. You have covered congressional investigations of Hunter Biden extensively. And we know today the House Republicans laid out the details to support the allegations they've made that members of the Biden family, including Hunter, received millions of dollars in payments from foreign entities. What did you make of what the House Republicans showed and said today?
Well, Scott, what made this interim report from the House Oversight Committee stand out is that they now have subpoena power. And based on the interim report, they've received thousands of documents from the banks directly about these financial transactions. To simplify it, what they're alleging is that there was a years-long complex scheme that had a number of companies that ultimately provided financial benefits to members of the Biden family. We were told at the news conference there were 170 plus suspicious activity reports by the banks. These are transactions that are flagged for additional review. In this case, we don't know whether there was some kind of disciplinary action against these accounts or whether it was innocuous. The main complaint from Democrats and the White House is that despite all of these banking records, what the Oversight Committee has not done yet is draw this straight line between the financial transactions, the payments, and Joe Biden. And as you know, at the end of last week, President Biden said that he was confident that his son had done nothing wrong in his business dealings. But the committee will continue, they say, and issue more subpoenas on the matter.
In Washington, Catherine Herridge, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That does it for today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.